My dear friends, the more I use the Roman canon, the more I am aware of what I am touching and the generations that are touching me. The wording hints that it is probably essentially of apostolic origin. Who else would by instinct make appeal at that high point of prayer to figures like Melchizedek, Abraham, Abel, the mysterious angel? Who else but them would refer to Hunc Preclarum Calicem, this precious chalice, the very one that in the first celebrations they still had and still used, the one the Lord himself used? Who else would by instinct raise his eyes to heaven and reproduce this gesture of which we have just read in the Gospel, indicating precisely that same unchanging power which fulminates even species, creates matter, and is present here on the altar. This morning, my friends, while meditating on this Gospel, a few happy but also sad thoughts were coming to me. Paul VI was trying his best in the late 60s and early 70s to do what we would call a damage limitation operation. He was aware that there were underground pressure groups of considerable force trying to force his arm. He published a beautiful encyclical instruction on the Blessed Sacrament, indicating the way in which he desired that it be protected. The text bases its whole thrust and argument on one issue: tradition. Unfortunately, that is the one argument which is not sufficient to persuade modern theologians. Therefore, it had the reverse of the effect wished for. Everyone jumped in on the loophole, the exception which was meant to prove the rule. And that, down the line, is what we're at today. Now, in the Gospel, we notice that the Lord himself was the prime mover, but he did make appeal to the practicality of distribution. Now, this has been used as a lever, and still is, when priests approach a layperson to ask them to volunteer in distributing Holy Communion. They sometimes say things like, "I am not worthy." And they answer things like, "The Pope is not worthy." And they point out to this Gospel that the Lord made appeal to laymen. Now, do you see how fallacious those two arguments are? One, the Pope is essentially a priest, and a priest is ordained for that. Whether he be worthy or not, he is empowered, and it is part and parcel of his being set apart for God and his things alone. The other is pointing out something which is not in the same sphere. This is not a celebration of the Eucharist. It is a prefiguring of its power, but it cannot be used as a lever. Now, yesterday I decided to pick up again a book which I recommend to you. It's Maria Sima, Get Us Out of Here. She was a very simple Austrian peasant woman who from an early age found that she was being called to offer herself as a victim for the souls in purgatory. And as a result, these souls were, and as they would be for you, grateful. And she was given certain privileges as a result. When they were delivered, they were so grateful that they obtained great graces for her. And she was made aware of certain things in the beyond as a result of these graces. And thanks be to God and His providence, before she died, she was well interviewed. And we have, therefore, on record her own words regarding certain things. Listen. Is it not true, said the interviewer, that many of the things the poor souls have complained to you about are things that came out of Vatican II? How do you then feel about Vatican II? Yes, many of these modern matters did come out at the time of the Council, so to say, but these changes had nothing to do with the spirit of the Council itself. Now listen to that. The Council itself had to be the Holy Spirit. An ecumenical council cannot err. It's the magisterium of the Church. All the bishops, in union with the Pope, cannot err. But at the core of Vatican II, there was so much good, and most definitely the Holy Spirit was working strongly there. She goes on, certain positive things like recognizing and respecting other Christians. And one other issue which I just want to point out here is this, because Paul VI alluded to it. He said this, and I'm just paraphrasing, it had been hoped that in the springtime of Vatican II there would be a renewal, a revivifying of our faith and life, the liturgy and prayer. And he goes on, there was that. Then he goes on, but, and we know that he was aware, sitting where he was, in the middle of the church, and aware of all its evolution, that the smoke of Satan had entered by some chink into the temple of God. He was aware that he was opposed himself. Now, it's in that I want to enter into what she is saying here. Because, by the way, I meant to say that. I've found that people place the problem in the wrong area. Because when I celebrate at home in the Hermitage, in whatever language it may be, or combination of languages, the problem doesn't exist. The presence is the presence. The problem is when people come in and disobey, and come with disrespect, and come in a state of mortal sin, and so on. It's not the rite, it's other things linked to the elasticity of the rite. They're two separate issues, and one does not have to follow. And the example is this, the monastery in which I was ordained in Italy, my own community. We had facing the east with incense every day, and in Latin, but the present rite, with great reverence, the maximum for God. It was not a problem. The problem is elsewhere. Just to be clear on the issue. However, as always happens with the holy places, people or event, Satan is lurking right outside the wall, and he attacks, divides, divide and conquer. You know what devil means, don't you? Diabolein, to get inside and divide. And causes turmoil wherever possible, on the periphery, in an attempt to weaken what is at the core. What does he do? He works at the weak elements. Those who are modern and not in a state of intense prayer. They're more open to modern ideas because they're not aware of all the implications. By the way, young Joseph Ratzinger was very open-minded in the years preceding the council, and he knew what positive change and renewal meant, but he was one of the first to cop on what was happening. Read Ratzinger, he's got the whole vision. And to be more precise, far more organized and persistent than most Catholics. Listen to this. I have been told by at least 3 very reliable sources that the Freemasons met as early as in 1925 to start pushing through communion in the hand. And she adds, it took them a while, but they certainly succeeded. Now, as late as 1980, we have instructions from on high, John Paul II, indicating that Holy Communion, that the handling of the sacred species was reserved to the ordained. That's as late as 1980. He was up against it as well. It's quite subtle what actually happened. It was this disobedience from certain blocks of bishops in the north of Europe in particular, which led to the first weak change, which opened the door, when the exception came in, bit by bit, one episcopacy after the other. It was quite late in Britain, I remember it coming in. That mentally opened the door. Oh, non-consecrated hands can touch it. Remember, that's 2,000 years of history changing like that. Okay, now I won't go into detail, but bit by bit, things came in which, as I say, very slowly brought in the new norm, which now is massively out there. Anyone can touch. Partly, unfortunately, linked with other parallel secondary issues like equal rights and involvement of the laity and in particular of the female sex, even in the sanctuary area of the church, which, remember, was not there and still is not there in the East to this day. Because it also, that thing there, led to something else, shedding garments. Because the acolyte, who could be called subdeacon when the subdiaconate was taken away, they were the new subdeacons, they were vested in alb, and therefore dignified should they be holding the chalice, because there was the inspiration that it would be good to have the chalice or under intinction so as to have the fullness of the sign. Now, bit by bit, we've got therefore this norm, which is no longer protected by the Holy Spirit, because it's come not from the council in union with the Pope, but essentially from pressure groups, not in union with the Holy Spirit necessarily, but wanting equal rights. Now, why am I saying all this? I'm saying this, my friends. It's very difficult now to find a celebration in the new rite where one is not up against abuse and painful sacrilege in some shape or form. What does one do? One can navigate and limit the damage by finding an interiorized celebration, sometimes not at peak times, early in the morning, or in a convent, or somewhere where there is genuine prayer. One can opt for the alternative of going only to the old rite, and one is perfectly in one's rights to do that. The Holy Father has recognized that there's much hurt, and he wants that to be possible. But don't confuse the issue. Grace is grace. God comes, and when he comes, he heals, loves, and embraces. Look at him. Don't confuse your mind with the level of the problem. Your problem is love. That can happen if you want it. I just conclude. The Lord wants his own back, his rights. And he's putting on many people the desire to give it back. Listen to that in prayer. Adoration. Adoration in reparation, looking at the one who's abused and feeling his pain. Also, don't be afraid to give time. Much time, because people don't give time to their God, and when that happens, grace has its full effect. Just conclude one aside, it's linked. Things happen out of the blue, because God is God, and he can get his own back when he wants. While I was waiting to come into the church, because there was a baptism on here now, my phone rang. It was the new foundation just close to where I am, Benedictine monks, out of the blue. Henceforth, they can't any longer not hold the sacred mysteries every day. He's got to go to France this week, so could you sing the Latin Mass? What right, I asked, because I thought it was the new, as we had in our monastery, but in Latin. No, it's the traditional one. I thought, wow, who would have thought in the county of Meath in 2012, a High Mass every day is being sung on the old altar of the nuns where we sang the High Mass once a week for a year. It's the same altar. What I say is this, my friends, look around. If you want it, you can find it. And if you can't, get it to happen in what pertains to you.